the best Dreamforce ever. And I'll tell you, I'm just so grateful to all of you because you've really made this so special for all of us. We've now had more than 150,000 people registered to attend the event, and as of last night, more than 3 million people have attended with us online. Also, isn't that awesome? That's great. I want to thank you for raising more than $9 million for the Children's Hospital on Tuesday night with our concert. And I also have to thank you for the incredible participation in our philanthropic events this week. You've now helped us raise more than 1 million meals for the hungry. So thank you for that. And isn't that awesome? And incredible program yesterday with our vets, and we're working hard to train 10,000 vets for new jobs in the computer industry. So thanks for all your great support. You guys have really been just completely off the hook in everything you've done this whole week. Well, today we have a very, very special program. We have some incredible speakers, and it's really a dream come true for me, and I'll tell you why. I wanted to turn today to some of the biggest issues that we have in the world. I want to come back to the environment, talk about the environment, and we have one of the great leaders of that cause here with us. Of course, one of our greatest vice presidents, of course, incredible Nobel laureate. We also have one of the greatest musicians of our time, who's also deeply dedicated to this issue. And then we're also going to move into a spiritual moment, and we're going to hear from two incredible authors of books and pundits who are going to help us to ground ourselves in our own reality. So what I would like to do right now is introduce you to one of the most special people I've ever met, someone who is a visionary and a prophet, someone who we have all learned to love and follow. He, of course, was our 45th Vice President of the United States. He, of course, has a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, but he has really brought us a level of enlightenment around the environment, and that has transcended everything that he has ever done. I remember reading his first book and saying, everything we do has to change. What he's about to do with us, the transformation that he will bring to this audience, I believe is probably the most important thing that we will do at Dreamforce this week. Please welcome Al Gore.
Here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. It's my first time at Dreamforce. I've heard so much about it, and I've really been looking forward to it a lot. I'm going to talk to you about the climate crisis. Some of you know the old cliche that in Chinese, the most common way to write the word crisis is with two characters. One's danger, the other is opportunity. And this is a crisis. It's the most serious challenge we've ever faced in the history of civilization. But it's also the greatest opportunity to create new jobs and to solve a lot of problems that should be addressed for other reasons anyway. We're going to have to do it. And the exciting thing is we are beginning to solve this crisis now. I'm going to show you a bunch of slides here. Most of them are brand new. And the first part of it is going to describe why this is the biggest crisis we've ever faced. But then the second part of it, hold on, because there's hope, there's a lot of hope, and there's a lot of excitement about how we are beginning to stir and how we are going to solve this. The only question is how long it's going to take. And I want to tell you right here at the outset that my purpose in being here at Dreamforce is to do my best to encourage you, even enlist you in helping to turn the world toward a solution for this crisis. I'm not just talking at you. I'm doing my best to try to share with you the passion and feeling that I've developed over the years about this, because it really matters a lot to the future of human civilization, to our kids and grandkids. Okay, let me start with this famous picture called Earthrise. This was the first picture ever taken by a human being of the Earth from space. This was when the Apollo 8 mission went around the moon. They didn't land. They were looking at the surface of the moon for landing sites, and one of them looked up out the window and said, "Whoa, what is that?" And it was like a family on vacation in a station wagon saying, "Hey, get my camera, get my camera." And within 18 months of this picture being seen, the first Earth Day was held, and major legislation was passed around the world. This is the last picture of the entire Earth taken from space by a human being. This was on the last of the Apollo missions. And I start with these pictures to try to set the context of what's at stake. This is our only home, but here is a view of the Earth that really is important in explaining why this is a crisis. When we look up at the sky, normally, the sky looks like a vast and limitless expanse. It doesn't seem like it'd be any problem to spew pollution up there. But you see this image from the space shuttle. The atmosphere is incredibly thin, and we're putting 110 million tons of global warming pollution up there every single day. We're using this as an open sewer, and it's trapping a lot of heat. There's a natural greenhouse effect, a lot of you know this, where we're the so-called Goldilocks planet, not too cold like Mars, not too hot like Venus, but just right for human beings and the other forms of life that have been created and have evolved here. But we are now putting all this heat-trapping pollution into the atmosphere. And there are many sources of it. I'm going to concentrate on the CO2 from burning fossil fuels. This image is one I don't want you to spend any time on. I'm only showing it to you to illustrate the fact that it's a complicated issue. Burning coal and oil is the main part of it, but industrial agriculture and factory farming is part of it. And also the melting permafrost is beginning to be an issue, and the burning and destruction of forests and mining and so forth. But the main part of it is that starting 150 years ago when the first oil well was drilled and oil was joined up with coal to be the main source of energy in the world, 85% of the world's economy now is powered by carbon-based energy. And the emissions, we didn't mean to put all these emissions up there. It just kind of came at us as an unintended side effect, but now it's the main deal. And the cumulative amount of man-made global warming pollution now traps as much extra heat into the atmosphere as you would see from all these explosions. I'll get to that in a minute, but first I want to show you, this is the relationship between CO2 going up and temperature on the planet going up. So what I started to say is the energy trapped is equivalent to 400,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs going off on the Earth every day. It is a big planet, but that is a lot of energy when you multiply it times 400,000 every 24 hours. And so this is the only complicated slide that I'm going to show. This is a classic bell curve, and what it shows is the distribution of temperatures on the Earth. These scientists measured the temperature on the Earth going back to 1951 on the entire planet, and they took the 30 years that started with 1951 as the so-called normal period. And the white temperatures there represent normal days, the blue is cooler than normal days, and the red is warmer than normal days. So in the 1980s, the whole thing shifted to the right, and the warmer than normal days started getting a lot more common. And in the 1990s, all of a sudden we get these extremely hot days occurring a lot more frequently in the lower right. And in the last decade, these extremely hot days have become more common worldwide than the cooler than normal days. And you can see the warmer and hotter days are now dominating the world's temperature. In fact, the extremely hot days are now 100 times more common than they were just 30 years ago. And this is causing extreme weather events. It's causing the temperature of the world to go up for sure. Last year was the 37th year in a row with the global temperature above the 20th century average, and last month was the 355th month in a row above the 20th century average. And each decade it keeps on getting warmer, and it's picking up pace in recent years and recent decades. It's really been accelerating. Now the heat itself has an impact on people. Last year in India was the worst heat wave they had ever experienced. The heat has an impact on animals and plants and on ecosystems, and we'll talk about that just a little bit. But on a global basis, 90% of the extra heat trapped by this pollution goes into the oceans that cover more than 70% of the planet. And the ocean temperatures, as a result, have been going up quite dramatically. And this has a number of consequences, and I want to talk about a couple of them. First of all, when storms go over warmer ocean waters, they get stronger. This was Super Typhoon Haiyan just about 1 year ago that crossed areas of the Pacific Ocean on the way to the Philippines that were more than 5 degrees warmer than normal. And it became the most powerful and destructive storm ever to make landfall. It generated 4.1 million homeless refugees in the Philippines. Some of them are still homeless a year later. And they're still getting bigger than normal storms. This was just a couple of weeks ago, actually less than 1 month ago in the Philippines. And as always, the most vulnerable are hardest hit. Here in the United States, when Superstorm Sandy came across the Atlantic toward New York and New Jersey, it crossed areas of the Atlantic that were 9 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than normal. And so it became an utterly devastating storm, and many of you remember it. A few years ago when I put out a movie on this, some of the critics focused more than anything else on a scene in the movie that showed the ocean water going into the 9/11 Ground Zero Memorial Site. They said, oh, that's ridiculous, that could never happen. But when Superstorm Sandy hit, this is what happened.
The Hudson River, downtown Manhattan, was literally pouring into the Ground Zero site.
And these storms have been getting stronger all over the world. But here is the second effect of the oceans warming up, getting all this extra heat trapped by pollution. This is not water that you're seeing in this image. This is water vapor. And a lot more water vapor comes off the warmer oceans into the sky. And they fuel these enormous downpours. This is over Montana. And one of the things this picture illustrates is that the raindrops that fall out of that cloud don't all originate from the part of the sky directly above where they fall. They are funneled toward that from as much as 2,000 kilometers away. It's sort of like if you have a bathtub and you open the drain, the water rushing down the drain obviously doesn't come just from the part of the tub directly above the drain. It comes from the whole tub. And these basins of water vapor in the sky are funneled toward these storm downpours, and so the downpours are getting a lot bigger, and the warmer air holds more water. This is the water cycle that everybody knows about. The evaporation falls as rain and sometimes as snow, and then the water rushes back to the sea. But when the air gets warmer, it holds a lot more water vapor. Each degree increase increases the holding capacity 7%, and just in the last 30 years, the humidity of the entire Earth has increased by 4%. So this makes a huge difference. The downpours get a lot bigger. This is the change in average global temperatures and the increased incidence of heavy precipitation days. And there are many examples of this around the world. This was last spring in Pensacola, Florida. They got 2 feet of rain in 26 hours. This was an observer with a video camera while all this was going on. Oh my God!
There's someone in there. Oh my
This
God.
same storm went up the east coast of Baltimore the following day, and after the huge downpour it dumped there, and this happened.
Oh my God.
So our infrastructure was built in a world that we have now changed. And these downpours, this was just last 2 months ago in Nepal, the downpours caused mudslides as well. Pakistan got more than 13 inches of rain in 24 hours. This is nearby across the border. This is in Jammu and Kashmir. Last month in Chongqing, China, in Hiroshima Prefecture, at the end of August. In Afghanistan earlier this year, more people were killed in mudslides, or as many killed in mudslides almost as were killed the entire previous year in the war in Afghanistan. So this was last week, 7 days ago in Genoa, Italy. Another one of these freak, you can't call them freak anymore. A lot of communities have 500-year downpours 3 or 4 times a decade now, and 1,000-year events. And so this was in France just less than a month ago. They had 2 billion euros of damage in France alone. This was 2 weeks ago in Montpellier, 10 inches of rain in 3 hours. They ought to call it Montpelier because it's named after a city in Vermont, as I understand it. But, we can't forget the historic flood that followed the downpours in Pakistan 4 years ago, when 20 million people were displaced from their homes, further destabilizing a nuclear-armed country. These events are devastating, especially for some of these poor and developing countries. This was last year in India, in Uttarakhand. This was in Srinagar. This was in Germany last year. 6 countries in Central Europe had a so-called 500-year flood. Again, earlier this year in England, by far the worst downpours, worst flooding in the history of the United Kingdom. Thousands of homes were underwater for 8 weeks and more. These kinds of freak events have occurred in the past, but they were very rare. Now they're 100 times more common. And so it is kind of a wake-up call. Now here's the second effect of all the extra heat trapped in the atmosphere. It not only makes the ocean-based storms stronger and puts so much more water vapor in the sky that the downpours and the floods and the mudslides get bigger, it also sucks all the moisture out of the first few centimeters of the soil and makes droughts a lot deeper and longer. Today, in Guatemala and in 4 other countries in Central America, almost 2 million people are hungry. In Guatemala, 80% of the corn crop has been destroyed by this drought. This is in Brazil. They have an election in 10 days, and there's a chance they'll change their policy. They're not talking much about this now, but they have a very huge historic drought underway in Brazil. This is one of their big water reservoirs almost dry. Today in China, a huge drought, 6 provinces, the worst in over 60 years. And it follows an historic drought just 3 years ago that covered most of China. This was the largest lake in China during that drought. And these events have come home here to California. Today, 100% of this state is in drought. 58% of California is in the highest worst category of drought. The reservoirs that are normally full now look like this. Here's last year was the driest year ever in California. This is Lake Oroville Reservoir. The snowpack is usually 100 centimeters at this location. It was almost 0 this year. Farmers are really being hit hard. These droughts are really getting extremely serious, and they cause fires. This was less than a month ago, the Bowles Fire in Weed, California. There's some fires going on right now, of course. This one caused the destruction of 150 homes. This next one was down in San Diego County.
Oh my God!
Near Fort Camp Pendleton. Now this is the relationship between higher temperatures and fires. It's been understood by the scientists for a long time. When the temperature goes up, not only the soil but the vegetation dries out, and whatever the cause of the initial spark that leads to a fire, it spreads way more quickly. And of course, other consequences lead to diseased trees, the bark beetles, and so forth. But this is what they are, the fire season, I'm sorry, in California is now almost year-round. And this is what they're projecting with a 1 degree increase, 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature for fire. Now, I'm a visual person. Other people process information differently. For me, this really is a powerful image. Look, what it shows is that in areas of Colorado, for example, they project a 600% increase in the amount, in the median area burned by the fires that hit Colorado. Most of California, 200, 300% increase in the median area burned. And this is with a 1 degree increase. We've already had 1 degree, this is an additional degree. That's the world's goal. This is the optimistic case. We're trying to hold it to this amount of increase. And we'll adapt and we'll deal with this, but we have to be really clear about what we're doing to our world and how we need to quickly reverse the pollution that's causing this. In Brasilia, just one month ago, the Amazon is threatened again. This was the biggest fire in Chile earlier this year. Valparaiso really devastated by this. This was in Colombia in August. And we can't forget the historic fire following the worst drought they ever had in Russia a few years ago, where this covered a vast area of Eurasia, and 53,000 people were killed by smoke inhalation mainly. But 4 months later, Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan pulled all their grain off world markets because so much of the crop at home had been destroyed. So for the second time in 3 years, world food prices reached an all-time peak, and there were food riots in a dozen countries. There are multiple threats to the food supply, including drought, including the changes in precipitation patterns, including heat stress alone, including the heat building up the pests like the beetles and plant diseases. So food is a big issue here. And this shows, the legend at the bottom shows on the lower left the most extreme forms of drought and what they're projecting through this century. Just take a moment to look at the cradle of Western civilization. Greece, Turkey, Italy, France, Spain. The projection is this would be devastating. Look at the breadbasket of North America in the middle of the Midwest. Look at Mexico and some of the other areas that are at risk. It's hard to wrap our minds around how big this is. You know, we've quadrupled population in less than 100 years. We've got all these powerful technologies. It's a new relationship between human beings and the earth. And we have got to take responsibility for the consequences that we are in danger of causing for the earth. Here is a, thank you, I'm glad to hear that. One of the parts of that global map that was hit hard by the patterns that are causing these droughts was Syria. And you know, the gates of hell have opened in Syria. It's the most heartbreaking, tragic thing going on there. Not just ISIS, but you know, all of the conflicts even before ISIS started. What led to this? Well, there were many causes. Assad, the leader there, a lot of political factors. But they had a drought from 2006 to 2010 that destroyed 60% of all the farms in Syria and 80% of all the livestock. And it drove 1 million climate refugees into the cities, where they collided with another 1 million refugees from the Iraq War. And the WikiLeaks had documents where they were internally saying in Syria, we can't handle this. This is going to explode on us. We cannot deal with this. So the climate-related drought really set the stage for the chaos and the horrific consequences there. So 3 days ago, the Department of Defense here in the United States released its climate change roadmap. And here's what they said. It's going to intensify global instability, hunger, poverty, and conflict. When the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Defense Department of the United States are saying, hey, we got to get busy and confront this, that is a clue that we need to start taking this way more seriously than a lot of people have in the past. We are too dependent on fossil fuels. How long are we going to be so dependent on regions of the world that are so unstable and dangerous that we have to keep sending troops there? And it's not only in the Middle East. Look at the conflict right now in the South China Sea. What's that all about? Here are the Vietnamese patrol boats. What are they doing there? Well, there's the Chinese oil drilling platform. Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, China, all in conflict because we are still obsessed as a civilization to go and get the last bits of fossil fuel that we can constantly find. What about Ukraine? Why isn't Europe backing up the U.S. with more effective sanctions against Russia? Well, could it be that they get 40% of their fossil fuels from Russia? They're so dependent on Russia that they are timid about speaking up and saying, no, you can't just cross international borders and invade another country. That's something that ought to be left in the past. We need to break our dependence from these fossil fuels for a variety of reasons. Now, I'm going to show you real quickly the North Pole and the South Pole, just briefly. The North Polar ice cap is a floating ice cap, and it's about 1 meter thick. It used to be 2 to 3 meters thick, but it's melted off quite a bit. 2 years ago was the all-time record extent. More than half of it's gone just in the last 30 years. Here's what it looked like in 1984, and here's what it looked like in 2012. And this has a number of consequences. You remember the polar vortex? Well, the majority of scientists are now saying that all that melting of ice in the Arctic is causing a vast increase in the absorption of heat in the Arctic. And so where the jet stream goes in the northern hemisphere and where the storm track goes, that's bounded by low pressure, high pressure areas, cold air and warm air. And look at how the jet stream is breaking up and getting chaotic. And over in the Pacific Northwest and in the Arctic, it's getting way warmer, but it brings all that polar air down into the northeastern part of the United States. In Alaska last year, it was 96 degrees Fahrenheit north of Anchorage, Alaska. So maybe that's good if you like to sunbathe north of Anchorage, Alaska, but some of you saw this image on the internet last week with 35,000 walruses that usually live on the ice of the Arctic hauling out with their big tusks. And these events are happening with regularity all around the Arctic basin now. And this is another problem because in the Arctic soils that have been frozen for so long, there's a lot of methane. And also frozen plant matter that turns into both methane and carbon dioxide when it warms up. This is a woman professor in Siberia. She's from Alaska, but she's going to look at a frozen lake and looking at the methane that's just going straight up. And she's okay. The question is whether we will be. Now, before we leave the Arctic, I want to talk about Greenland. Because unlike the floating ice cap of the Arctic basin, Greenland is the second largest mass of ice in the world. And it is getting warmer and being destabilized. And it's floating toward, it is going into the sea and it's melting. This is a brand new finding about the smoke from the fires in the Arctic and algae coming from the warmer temperatures that is making the surface of Greenland much darker. What happens when it gets darker? It absorbs more of the sun's heat. The absorption of energy has increased by an amount that's equal to twice the U.S. average electricity consumption. So this is causing melting and movement of the glaciers. This is an hour's worth of video compressed into 30 seconds. Some of these chunks of ice on Greenland moving quickly toward the sea are the size of apartment buildings. And this has an impact on sea level rise. But way more important than Greenland is Antarctica, which is by far the largest mass of ice on the planet. In the lower left there is West Antarctica. It's roughly the size of Greenland. And you may have seen earlier this year the stories about how the loss of that ice sheet has now become irreparable, and that should not cause despair, because we can still affect the timing of it, and we can still have an impact on whether other large ice sheets in Greenland melt and go to the sea. But the red areas here show the accelerated melting, and in the bottom is one called the Pine Island Glacier, which is the fastest moving glacier in the world. All of this is leading to sea level rise. The rate of melting in Antarctica has doubled just in the last half decade. These are the cities that are most at risk from sea level rise. We are a coastal species. The vast majority of human beings live near the coast. These cities are the ones that are most threatened by population, but if you calculate it by assets at risk, Miami is the most threatened city in the world. Third most, New York and Newark. And by the way, Sacramento is not on this top 10 list, but it's an example of an inland city. Like Guangzhou is number 2 on the list, and it's pretty far from the coast, as some of you know who've been there. Well, what's going on in Miami already? Every time they have a high tide, this happens. When they have an unusually high tide. This is at Alton and 10th Street in Miami Beach, one of many locations in Miami Beach. They have, they have a governor and a senator who are deniers. I just picture them, not to bring politics into this, but I just picture them sloshing through that water saying, I don't notice anything. Do you notice anything? I mean, hello, how much longer? Noticing it, and they're saying a lot of these areas are not going to be insurable anymore. And by the way, we can't forget that some of these low-lying Pacific island nations are disappearing. Kiribati a few years ago added a new line item to their budget that said fund to purchase a new country. Now Bangladesh can't do that. This is the Maldives with a low seawall. They held a cabinet meeting underwater to try to get the attention of the world community on this. The cost of carbon is really adding up. We let people use the atmosphere as an open sewer for free. Hey, no problem. That's our global policy. Now just dump it into the atmosphere. We don't care. It will destroy the future of human civilization. But hey, we don't want to inconvenience you. I haven't even gone through all of these separate costs. I'll mention the environmental damage just from the fossil fuel itself and the danger to living species. The biologists remind us that this is really a problem. Now this is not species. We have lost more than half of the animals with which we share this planet in the last 40 years. And we are on track. We're at risk of losing up to half of all the living species. And the amphibians are really on the firing line, and this scientist over at Berkeley says, hey, amphibians have been around for 250 million years. Even when the dinosaurs were wiped out, it should be kind of a clue that something's going on if they're cutting out now. We are in a mass extinction spasm. Now, I'm not going to bring my religious faith into this. There are all kinds of religious traditions here, and I respect atheists that are here as well. But a lot of us understand the moral dimensions of this through the faith traditions that we've grown up with. And I believe that we have a moral duty to keep living species alive, and that it is immoral to allow the mass extinction of the web of life that we are a part of. And the climate crisis understood that way is a spiritual, it is the outer manifestation of a spiritual crisis. We've got to come to grips with this. It is extremely important. Now, Ebola is not on this slide, but the same set of consequences that are causing the extinction of large, visible animals also are affecting the microbial world. The relationship between humans and microbes is mediated by climate. That's one of the reasons a lot of the historians and geographers say that civilization so frequently advances to a higher level of development in the high latitudes where the burden of tropical diseases is less. The transportation revolution is a big part of the spread of these things, but a lot of these diseases like dengue fever, West Nile virus, now in the U.S., really they take root when there are fewer frost-free days, when the ticks and the mosquitoes and the other vectors have a much broader range. Now you get tick-borne diseases in Canada. They never had them before. So I'm not going to dwell on that, but it's one that bears watching. Tokyo wasn't even on that map. I gave a couple of 3 slideshows in Japan 2 weeks ago, and while they had closed one of the major parks because of dengue fever in Japan, hadn't been there in 70 years since the medical revolution. Then there are the consequences of conventional air pollution. You know, China has this air apocalypse now, where on certain days you just can't even see more than a few yards in front of you. Life expectancy in northern China has already gone down 5.5 years, even before the lung cancer epidemic kicks in. And a lot of people are now questioning, oh, well, this was from the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. They took this off the web a couple hours after it was put on, but somebody sent it to me. And this is the Forbidden City on a better day, and this is with the pollution. That's not fog, that's pollution. This is some digital wall art in China. I can't show this in China, but we know we have to change for a whole lot of reasons. This situation is getting ridiculous. All the scientific community is in agreement. Every National Academy of Science in the entire world, every professional scientific association. In the last survey, 99% of all the scientists that work in this field. Now, of course, some radio talk show people disagree, and some lobbyists for carbon polluters disagree. And it is easy to get a message from the news media that is kind of balanced 50-50. Maybe it's real, maybe it's not. The insurance industries, again, they say Munich Re and Swiss Re, this is the only plausible explanation. This is their job to figure out what's going on. So we have to come to a moment of important decisions. Many civilizations in the ancient past have got to a point where they had to make a choice, and some made the wrong choice. Now we are a global civilization, and we have this global crisis. Now, luckily, we have the opportunity to solve this. Now, this is the exciting part for me, and I want you to really tune into this. We need to speed this up, but we've got the wind at our backs, no pun intended. This was a projection just 14 years ago that the world's wind capacity would reach 30 gigawatts by 2010. Well, we exceeded that goal by 10 times over. So we are seeing tremendous progress. Wind electricity is now the cheapest kind of electricity that you'll find. This is a classic hockey stick curve. Wind capacity is growing rapidly. 6.5 million jobs already in wind. And in the United States, there are more jobs in solar than in coal. Now, I want to talk let me talk about the cost down curve for onshore wind. Offshore wind is also very exciting. Not going to take the time to do this, but this is a young 14-year-old boy in Malawi who had to drop out of school because his parents couldn't pay the tuition anymore. He found a blueprint for a windmill in a Popular Mechanics magazine in his village, and he scavenged the parts and made an honest-to-goodness working windmill to provide his family with the first electricity they have ever had. And then he became a local hero, and people started helping him, and he put windmills for the entire village. And he became kind of famous. He just graduated from William Kamwambe. He just graduated from Dartmouth last June, by the way. He's on his way to a very prosecution. God bless him. But there are bigger windmills and windmill arrays. This one in London powers almost 500,000 homes. But let's talk about solar. That's the one I'm most excited about. Because 12 years ago, the leading experts in the world projected that by 2010, the world would be able to install 1 gigawatt a year of solar energy. Well, guess what? When that time frame came around, we exceeded that goal by 17 times over. Last year, we exceeded it by 39 times over. This year, we're going to exceed it by 55 times over. What does this remind you of? We are always surprised when these technology cost down curves just blow things away. And we're used to slow, linear, gradual change. But there's some parts of the technology revolution, like computer chips famously, that produce a much more rapid rate of progress. This is extremely exciting to me. Look at this hockey stick. This is world solar photovoltaics production. And when these curves come up, we spend a long time looking at the flat part of the curve when we're living those years, and we think, oh, it's not going to change. Well, it is changing, and it's changing so dramatically now because the cost of the solar photovoltaic cells continues to come down so dramatically. And it's not just the cells, it's also the containers, it's the installation procedures, it's the capital financing model, and it's now competitive in many places, which I will show you. But think of it this way. What is the difference between 32 degrees or 33 degrees? Or if you live in the world of Celsius temperatures, 0 degrees and 1 degree. Well, it's a difference of more than a degree. It's a difference, obviously, between ice and water. And in markets, I've only been in the business world for 14 years, but one of the things I've learned is that there apparently is a difference in market competition if you have a product that is more expensive than the alternative compared to one that is cheaper than the alternative. Who knew? Well, it's the difference in markets between markets that are frozen up and markets that are liquid. Look at what's happened in the world. There are now 79 countries where the cost of electricity from photovoltaic cells is equal to or cheaper than the grid average price. Cheaper than. This is a revolution. And here are the countries as of the third quarter in 2014 that have already achieved solar grid parity. There are a lot of island nations in that run up the numbers. Guess what? In 6 years, 80% of the world's people will live in regions where the cost of PV electricity is equal to or cheaper than the price of electricity from other sources. We can do this. We are in the process of solving this. We've got to speed it up, and I'm going to tell you how we can. But this continues. The more solar we use and the more wind we use, the cheaper it gets. The more oil and coal we use, the more expensive it gets. And so these lines have already crossed over. Here's another precedent. I mentioned computer chips. You can talk about flat screen TVs. Just take the typical cell phone. Back in the day, when you remember those first big clunky handsets that came out, I pride myself on being an earlier adopter. I want to look like a geek, so I like those things. But at that time, Ma Bell, AT&T, said, hey, there may be a market for these things. And they engaged McKinsey to do a big market survey. How many would we sell by the year 2000? The answer came back 900,000, almost 1 million. Boy, that's really exciting. But when 2000 came, they sold 109 million, 120x higher. And guess what? This year, there are 6.3 billion cell phone contracts, and another 1.2 billion mobile phones will be sold this year. So the question is, why were they not only wrong, why were they way wrong? I've asked that question myself. Why were they so way wrong? And I think that the answer is really fourfold. Number one, the cost dropped quicker than anybody expected. And the quality went up at the same time, way more than anybody expected. The purchasing decisions were in the hands of individuals, not centralized bureaucracies or utilities. And most significantly, the majority of people in the world who live in developing countries did not have landline telephone access. So it wasn't a choice between the old and the new. It was a decision to leapfrog and get the service for the first time. If I ask for a show of hands here, how many people now use mobile phones only and have given up their landlines, I bet a lot of people would raise their hands. We've got such a big crowd, I'm not going to do it in this group, but typically I'll find 50% of the group. Well, guess what? In the electricity market, the majority of people in the world live in areas where they do not have landline electricity grids. 400 million people in the nation of India alone have no electricity whatsoever. In sub-Saharan Africa, 200 million in China have no electricity on the grid whatsoever. So this is another leapfrog situation. Now we see this developing. This is a grass hut in South Sudan with a solar panel. I've got a friend who sells these in India, and he told me about a conversation where a woman householder said, no, I can't afford 30 rupees a month. And he said, well, what about 1 rupee a day? And she said, okay, I can do that. And And she knows they're 30 days in a month, but she knows that her kids don't need access to digital knowledge all the time. She can use it when she wants it. So new business models are developing with pay-as-you-go solar power. This is the poorest country in the world, many years, Sierra Leone. Where kids are plugging into the digital universe of knowledge with PV cells powering the laptop computers. So, a question. What is the one country in the world that is doing the best job of installing rooftop solar PV panels? Germany? Sweden? The US? No. It is Bangladesh. 2 rooftop solar PV panels are installed every minute, 24 hours a day on average. This is exploding worldwide. Now in the US and in some other developing countries, the coal-burning centralized utilities are talking about the utility death spiral. I'll get to that in a minute. They're trying to slow this down. We don't need to slow it down. We need to speed it up because there are jobs in this. Millions and millions of jobs. This is the largest PV facility in the world in Arizona. New president of Chile just really has jump-started the renewables industry there. Look at what Michelle Bachelet is doing with the Chilean solar market. It is really incredible. And there are lots of countries that are jumping into this with both feet. And in one of the advanced countries, Germany, on May 11th this year, they got 74% of all of their electricity from wind and solar. Their average is up to 37%. And by the way, they're a northern latitude country with a lot of clouds. We can do this. This can be accelerated. This is the Vatican. They want to be the first capital to be entirely CO2 neutral. Now they got 2 advantages. They're very small and God is on their side. But here is what's happening in the US. Here in California, more solar panels were installed this year than in the previous 30 years combined. This is on a nationwide basis. Look at 2014, and it's going to have a comparable growth next year as well. This is all new energy generation in the U.S. In the first half of 2014. 0 from coal. The majority from renewables. This is the future. And by the way, we're not going to run out of the fuel. 1 hour's worth of sunlight equals more energy than the entire world uses in a full year. What are we waiting for? We need to take advantage of this. Energy storage is improving. Morgan Stanley says this is going to do to the electric grids what has been done to the landline telephone grids. Lithium-ion batteries. Battery costs for vehicles going down. And electric vehicles are being manufactured now in growing numbers. Utility scale energy storage. This again is a huge market. Lots of jobs, lots of investment, lots of opportunity. The coal business is in trouble. 9 out of 10 European coal and gas plants losing money. Top 20 utilities in Europe has lost half their value. These were the projected coal plants to be built in the U.S. These were the ones that were canceled because of public opposition. This is a response to, now this is the, that's the wrong video, I'm going to keep going here. Okay, this is the only other complicated slide, and we're getting real close to the conclusion here. This is the amount of carbon fuels that's been burned since 1850. This is the amount burned in the last 14 years. This is the amount of proven reserves still in the ground. This is how much we could burn if we wanted to stay below 2 degrees Celsius. What about the rest of it? $21 trillion of value listed on the books as if it's all going to be burned. Well, you know, I call them subprime carbon assets. There were 7.5 million subprime mortgages that were valued as if they were going to be paid off, given to people who didn't make a down payment, couldn't make the monthly payments. When they tested the market, it collapsed. This unburnable carbon is losing its value. But we need to recognize the age of renewables is now beginning. 4 years ago, for the first time, aggregate global investments in renewables exceeded that in fossil fuels. It flipped with the shale gas revolution, but it's coming back this year and next year. So the private sector is going to finance most of this, 62% thus far. This is a great business opportunity. Green bonds have increased 10 times over in just the last 2 years. The world is beginning to move on this. Warren Buffett invested $15 billion. He just announced he's going to invest another $15 billion. He's not known for making dumb market decisions. he sees what's doing. And companies that go this route are finding that they save a lot of money. 60% of the Fortune 500 have plans to jump into this. All these companies are already on 100% renewables, and I want to congratulate Salesforce.com, Mark, for making its pledge to be the first cloud computing company in the world to be at 100% renewable energy. I love this company. Here in the Bay Area, Google has spent $1 billion on clean energy. Apple uses 94%. It's on the way to 100% renewable energy. But here's how we accelerate it. We need to put a price on carbon in markets. We need to internalize all that cost of carbon that we're already paying in other ways so that business and investors and individuals will get accurate market signals so we can speed up this revolution. And in order to get a price on carbon in markets, we need to put a price on denial in politics. We're way past time. People keep saying, this is real. Come on. So, just a month ago in New York, the United Nations had a special session. 400,000 people marched in the streets. Tens of thousands marched in many other major cities around the world. We are at a tipping point. We have a long way to go. But this challenge is different from any other challenge we've ever faced. We have only one home, and we don't need to let it recede from this. Is the famous pale blue dot. In the upper right, Carl Sagan said when that satellite got 5 billion kilometers away, what do we look like? A pale blue dot suspended in a sunbeam. This is our planet under the rings of Saturn. And as we come back to focus on where we live, this is our only home. Don't let anybody tell you that we're going to get on a rocket ship and go live on some other planet. We couldn't even evacuate the city of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina hit. This is our home. We need to make our stand right here. Now, in conclusion, years from now, the next generation will live in a world of our choosing. And depending on their circumstances, they will ask one of two questions. If they live in a world with deeper droughts and bigger floods and rising seas and hundreds of millions of climate refugees and the collapse of governance and chaos in regions where they have civil wars and violence and fights over resources and all of the terrible spread of disease that is predicted with by the scientists, they would be justified in looking back at us through the mist of time and asking, what were you thinking? Why didn't you do something about this? Wasn't it, the science was there. The business opportunities were there. Why didn't you do something? But if they live in a world with tens and then hundreds of millions of new jobs, retrofitting buildings with LEDs and insulation and better windows and installing solar panels and windmills and sustainable agriculture and sustainable forestry, if they have hope in their hearts and know that their kids will have a brighter future still, I want them to look back at us and ask, how did you find the moral courage to rise up and solve this crisis? And ladies and gentlemen, I firmly believe that one part of the answer will be that in October of 2014, an extraordinary collection of men and women at Dreamforce decided to do something about this. All we need is political will, but political will is a renewable resource. Thank you very much for hearing me out.
And I'm so glad that Al accepted our invitation to be here. And I was just thinking, you know, there is this incredible presidential election coming up in 2016. Anybody want to be on that point? You know, Al, one thing I was also thinking is, I'm always thinking, I watch the presentation, what are one or two or three things everyone in this audience and everyone watching online can do? I just built a new house and I put solar panels on the entire roof, and I couldn't believe I got 13 kilowatts, and it's a relatively small roof. And in San Francisco with the fog, and it's been a great success story. And what should we be doing? We could do solar panels on our roofs. What are one or two or three things that we could do, personal actions that all of us can take?
Well, I would encourage people to do three different kinds of things. First, the kind of things you were just talking about. When you go into the marketplace, it makes a difference if you choose the more environmentally responsible, climate responsible alternative. It's not an accident that all these businesses, consumer-facing businesses particularly, are going green and making these investments, because they've heard from enough of their customers that it's important to them, that they're really leading the charge on this. So when you add to that momentum, that's a non-trivial thing. So if you make a habit of that, that's important. Secondly, don't underestimate the importance of your interactions with your friends, in your social circles, in your clubs, in your businesses. It really matters. I'll tell you a story. When I was, I don't know, 11, 12, 13, in Tennessee on the farm, I remember a time during the Civil Rights Revolution where one of my friends made some kind of quasi-racist comment, and another one of my friends spoke up and said, "Hey, shut up, man, we don't talk that way anymore." And there were millions of conversations where the tide turned. That's how women's suffrage came about. That's how the abolition movement succeeded. That's how the anti-apartheid movement grew. 2 years ago here in California, I saw a story about two gay men waiting in line for a pizza holding hands, and some homophobic jerk walked by and made some ugly comment, and according to the journalist, literally every other person in that line turned on him and said, "Hey, shut up, we don't accept that." Winning the conversation on climate is a non-trivial matter. So there are people out there who are sort of like, a dysfunctional family with an alcoholic father, where everybody in the family is afraid to mention the word alcohol because he'll fly into a rage. And so everybody keeps quiet, they don't even mention it. That's how a lot of people treat the climate conversation today. Speak up in your conversations. You can turn the direction of this ship of state, and the U.S. can help turn the world. Finally, you live in a democracy. There are people here from other countries as well, but exercise your role as a citizen. Our democracy has decayed to some extent. Money's playing way too big a role, but you can still make it respond. If you make it clear to candidates and to political figures, "Hey, this is a big deal to me. I want you to do something about it." That matters. If you tell them, if you do the wrong thing, I promise you I'm going to do everything I can to defeat you at the next election. That makes an impression. So these three things are what I would urge people to do.
Well, thank you so much. Al, in 2008, we had an incredible experience where we had someone who was an amazing rock and roll legend here who wanted to make a statement about the environment. And the room was set up, and all the Dreamforce was much smaller then, and the room was cut in half, and all the chairs were set up that direction. And there's a big stage, and he came out, and he's talking about how important it is to take these kind of personal actions. And he took one of his old cars, I think it was a 1959 Lincoln Continental Mark IV or something like that, took out the old gas engine, put it in an incredible electric engine, added like biomass as his kind of hybrid, and he drove it out on stage, and everyone stood up and applauded his effort. And I thought it would be a wonderful conversation and a great gift to Dreamforce if we invited him back, and maybe you could have a dialogue to kind of bring another dimension to what you've delivered, the most incredible presentation on the environment I've ever seen. So please welcome rock and roll legend Neil Young. Hey!